Hey, church. I hope you're doing well. So let me ask you, have you ever taken time to think about all of the implications of some of your choices? Gone through like a decision you made way back in the past and how that might affect you today, how your life might be different had you done something slightly different then. For instance, like the choice that you may have made coming out of high school, right? I mean, that's a big time choice right then. And it's kind of crazy when we think about it. You tell some 18-year-old kid who thinks they know everything, knows something, but not quite everything yet. And you're like, hey, Skippy, what you want to do with your life? Skippy says, I want to join the family business. Awesome. On you go. Or I want to enter into a trade. Awesome. On you go. Or I want to go to college to do this or that or the other thing. Awesome. On you go. And as an 18-year-old, we're tasked with this decision, this choice to make that impacts so many different things. Take me, for instance, in my own story. If I think about the choices that I made then, if you would go back to 18-year-old me and say, hey, Chris, what do you want to do when you get older? I would have said, well, I want to be a doctor. I plan on going into family medicine. And so 18-year-old me made a decision to go to college. And the college that I chose to go to was one that had a good pre-med program, a high acceptance rate into medical school, because that's what I wanted to do. And so my thoughts about my future in terms of the path that I was taking led to a choice to choose Grove City College here in Pennsylvania. And so I came out there and went to school. A couple years in, I made another choice. I decided I don't really like pre-med. I'm not really sure that I want to be a doctor. How do I still graduate with a degree and have some more time playing Frisbee? I chose to drop out of, biology and all that stuff and took up psychology. At the end of college, another choice, another opportunity came. I got a phone call in the dorm room, still on one of those corded deals. We didn't have the cell phones yet. The phone rang, I answered. It was, somebody in some kind of office saying, hey, there's a company here that wants to do on-campus interviews. Are you interested? I had no idea what I was going to do. I said, sure. I interviewed with this company called Adelphi Village. They had offices in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. They offered me a job. They fed me dinner. They showed me around all of these beautiful mountains and things. Next thing you know, there I go. I'm in Latrobe. On and on these choices go. And it led me ultimately to this point where I have a wonderful wife, a great son. I'm working in ministry. Different choices opened up one after another, and it had all of this as the result. Did I know as an 18-year-old kid what that first choice would lead to? That decision to pursue medicine and subsequently go to a college in Pennsylvania? Did I know that choice would lead me to now where I'm engaged in ministry and living in Pennsylvania full time and raising my family here? Did I know all of the ramifications of what I chose back then? And what if I would have zigged someplace where I zagged? Or if I went straight when I had turned right or left, or you get the idea. How might things have been different? See, we as people, we're limited in our capacity to see the future. We might have plans, goals, visions, aspirations, all of these things about where we would like to go. But we don't know all of the implications of our choices in the moment that we're making them. I had no idea that this is where I would end up. And I'm incredibly grateful that it is. But I didn't know that then. How could I? Nor do I know how the choices that I make right now will impact future me or other people connected to me. We're significantly insignificant, even in terms of our ability to see the impact of our choices, for good or for bad. We can't see all of the ramifications of those decisions. We can sometimes look back and wonder, what if I did things differently? How might my life look different now? But in the moment, at the time of the decision, we can't see everything. We might have an idea about how some things will work, but get too far out there and we have no clue. No clue about what is coming, about what lies ahead. So what are we to do? How are we to decide? How are we to make choices in our life? Well, to answer that question, I want for us to pick up where we were last week with this significantly insignificant woman named Rahab, and see how her choices impacted her future in ways that were far beyond what she could have possibly known or imagined. Now, just to catch us up, in case you weren't with us last week, you know Rahab. You can read about her in Joshua. And Rahab was known as a prostitute. That's what she was. She was a prostitute, living a life of ill repute, making poor decisions, at least in terms of, the eyes of God and what would be an acceptable path for someone to follow. Rahab was a prostitute in the land of Canaan. And in particular, she lived in this town of Jericho. Jericho, this walled fortress, this city that was key for the Israelites entering the promised land. The Israelites needed to take over Jericho to be able to take over the rest of what God had promised them. Rahab was a insignificant person within that city. And yet, though she had many character flaws, though she had many choices that were not ideal for her life, and though she had made decisions that she surely would regret, Rahab made a choice of faith that forever impacted her life and the life of countless others. She made a choice to believe in God, to recognize that God is the God in heaven as well as the God on the earth below, and to put her faith and her trust in God. And by doing so, she stepped out on that faith and she hid these spies that were following God's plan, these spies from the nation of Israel that were going about God's purpose. She hid them and protected them, and she asked them, would you watch over me? Will you keep me and my family safe when Jericho falls? I know that this city will be destroyed. I know that the walls will come a-tumbling down. When that happens, will you remember my act of faith and protect me? And they make this agreement. And so today we're going to see the results of that agreement, the results of Rahab's faith, and how that impacted not only her, but many people to follow her. Gotta find my Bible. Set it a little further than normal, but we're going to look at Joshua chapter 6 and verse 20 and see how this story unfolds, how Rahab's decision of faith at that earlier time impacts her present and also her future. Listen to Joshua chapter 6, starting in verse 20. When the trumpet sounded, the people shouted. And at the sound of the trumpet, when the people gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed. So every man charged straight in, and they took the city. They devoted the city to the Lord and destroyed with the sword every living thing in it, men and women, young and old, cattle, sheep, and donkeys. This is an extreme thing that happened at this time, not a plan for how people should conquer folks now, but this is what happened then. And so we hear this story of Jericho's fall, of Jericho's demise, of the Joshua in the battle of Jericho, and the walls come tumbling down, all of that right here. Joshua said to the two men who had spied out the land, Go into the prostitute's house and bring her out and all who belong to her in accordance with your oath to her." So the young men who had done the spying went in and brought out Rahab, her father and mother and brothers and all who belonged to her. They brought out her entire family and put them in a place outside the camp of Israel. Then they burned the whole city and everything in it. But they put the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron into the treasury of the Lord's house. But Joshua spared Rahab, the prostitute, with her family and all who belonged to her, because she hid the men Joshua had sent as spies to Jericho, and she lives among the Israelites to this day. Rahab made a choice of faith. She believed that God was going to have Jericho fall. And so she believed in God and acted on her choice of faith. And that had some immediate consequence. The first result of that was that the spies that Joshua had sent were saved. They weren't turned over to the king of Jericho. They weren't captured. They were saved and set free to go back to Joshua. That was the first immediate consequence, not in a negative way, but the first immediate result of Rahab's choice. Those men were spared. Joshua was informed of how the Lord had been working and how there was fear in the city. That was the first thing that happened. Then in this passage, we hear another short-term effect, another result that came about because of Rahab's choice. She and her family were also spared and were saved. Though the whole city and all living things in it were captured and done away with, Rahab was saved. Her brothers and sisters and parents and those who she accepted into her house as part of her family, all of those people were spared as a result of Rahab's faith. And if that were the whole deal, I think that would be enough. That would have been a good choice for her. You mean I can express belief in God and that saves a couple guys' lives, but it also protects me and my family? That's a pretty good choice for Rahab, I would think, especially as it lined up with God's plan. But then there's this additional little bit that we get right at the end in verse 25. And she lives among the Israelites to this day. Not only was Rahab saved right in that moment from that coming destruction, but she was given a new life in a new community with a new people serving the Lord. And I don't know if she could have anticipated that, how she was adopted into the Israelite family as a whole, how she was brought into their story and their people, following the one true God, the Lord of heaven and earth. Rahab's act of faith had long-lasting effects, had long-lasting consequence. She was brought in to this chosen people, this people of Israel, and that made an impact on her life, one that she could have never foreknew or anticipated. It brought benefit and blessing to her for a long time. And you can imagine or picture or just sort of come up with your own stories about what that might have looked like, how she might have talked to other women within the community and heard more about this God that she knew and that she began to trust, or how she might have been included in some of the celebrations and had conversations about Passover or different things, and the way that she was caused to grow and transform and what that did to her as a person. She could have never anticipated that. But that wasn't even the end of her story. We don't have a whole lot of detail about Rahab, but we do get another little piece of the puzzle, another little picture of what happened in her life. If you look in Matthew chapter 1, verse 5, you read this: Solomon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. That's not a very lengthy statement, but there's a lot in that. Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Rahab went from being a prostitute to a wedded woman with a child. And in that context, in that society, that was a big picture of redemption. For someone to be loved and wed and to bear children, that was a picture of what a woman at Rahab's time wanted to do, sought to do. That was the ideal. And Rahab achieved that. Her life was transformed. She was no longer the prostitute, the Canaanite woman from Jericho, who sold her body for profit. But now she was a wife and a mother. And those were two very important roles within that context, within that society. Rahab's whole life was transformed because she made a choice of faith in a moment when it was needed. And that's not all. I mean, if you continue in Matthew chapter 1, Solomon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab, Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth, Obed, the father of Jesse, and Jesse, the father of King David. Rahab, her great-grandson, the king, David. Could she have known when she was putting the flax over the spies and telling the king of Jericho they went that way while they were hiding on her roof? Could she have known when she said, God, you're the God in heaven and you are the God on earth. What you say is as good as it happening. Could she have known when she threw the scarlet rope out of her window as the signal that she was in that place waiting for her deliverance from these Israelites who were coming to take over the city? Could she have known when she took a step of faith that required difficult decisions and action? Could she have known that down the road, one of her offspring would be the king, David, that she would be included in his line, that those ripples of faith would continue on and continue on and continue on? And if you know your Bible a bit, and you know the history of the line of David and how Jesus comes as a descendant of David, could Rahab have known that Jesus would be born into her family, into her bloodline, by that act of faith? She was a significantly insignificant woman in just about every way you could paint that picture. And yet God used her faith in a significantly significant way, a way beyond Rahab could have ever imagined or dreamt. And the ripples of that continue on to this day. To this day. It's an incredible story of what God can do with just a bit of faith. Friends, you and I will need to make choices in our life. Some of them might seem significant at the time, others insignificant. But even as we're making these choices, we have no idea about all that might come, about the steps that might need to be taken, or the road that we're going down, or the shock waves of those decisions, the ripples of those decisions. We have no idea. You and I are significantly insignificant, especially in our understanding of all that is to happen in the future. So how do we choose? Do we choose to zig? Do we choose to zag? Do we choose to pause, to go to left, to right, to turn around and go back? I don't know for sure all those answers at all of those times. But the thing that I do know is that as we choose, we should do so in faith. With faith in God and a willingness to step out in faith wherever God directs. If that's a difficult path that we must take, one that involves risk and possible hardship, that we step in faith so that when we look back over our life, we know I took that step in faith. Things maybe didn't work out the way that I wanted, but I took that step in faith and it's led me to this point. And I took that next step in faith, and I'll take the next step in faith. And in the future, the ripples of those faithful decisions will go beyond anything I can imagine. Friends, you and I are tasked with walking in faith, with taking a lesson from a prostitute named Rahab, who took a step of faith, and it led to her life being transformed and her impacting all of history. You and I should learn from her and do the same, to trust in God and to step in faith whenever and wherever we're making decisions. To zig or to zag, it's not really the question. It's, will you walk in faith or by sight? Will you take a step in trusting God or in something else? I pray we choose faith for God's sake, for His glory. Amen.